Archives of Prasar Bharati presents the timeless treasure of golden era.
My life is my message. Noakhali, November 1946. Hindu killing Muslim. Muslim killing Hindu. Brothers killing brothers. From village to village, from township to township, the madness spread. And as it spread, hopes of putting out the flames of violence dwindled. No one had the courage or the power to stop the slaughter. No one, except Mahatma Gandhi, who decided he must go to the scene of carnage and put out the evil blaze. Few expected him to succeed. Many firmly believed that he would never come out alive from Noakhali. And it was as he was about to enter the inferno, that was Noakhali in those terrible days, that someone who firmly believed that this was Gandhi's last mission of healing on earth asked him for a special message for the world. Quietly he replied, "My life is my message." In Noakhali, he needed all his great attributes to put out the flames of violence. But he eventually succeeded in doing so, with the dramatic suddenness that amazed the world. What were these attributes, and how do they shine forth in his life and times? His utter humanity and love for his fellow men, nay, all men everywhere, transfigured him into the role of a saint. The late Rajkumari Amrit Kaur saw this in the early ashram days at Sevagram, when a leper came to the ashram.
When this Shastri came, he was a sufferer from leprosy. And he sat under a tree outside the other side of the road from where we lived. And then one of us discovered that it was Shastri, and he said, I didn't know him, but he said he had been in the Sabarmati ashram. And the moment Bapu heard that it was he, of course, he was summoned to the ashram at once. And then a little hut was built for him, and he lived there. And him, Bapu used to tend every day. He used to wash his sores, and we went there absolutely unafraid. And, of course, we took reasonable precautions, but that was all. And we just didn't have any fear in our hearts that we were going to get infected. When he washed the sores, he gave something not only to the victim of the disease, but to all of us who watched him do the work, which most of us would have been frightened to do.
His warmth and compassion led to a deep concern for the little man, the ordinary individual, beset with the problems of everyday life. When someone reminded him that it was Sunday, and having had a busy week, he should take a rest, he told them that the poor have no day of rest. Louis Fisher illustrates Gandhiji's concern for the poor and helpless and says that the Mahatma did not dwell on the summit alone.
He was not a god on Olympus. He walked on earth with little people and big people and treated them alike. I think it was one afternoon in 1946 when the cabinet mission had arrived to negotiate what became the independence of India. And one afternoon, I noticed that he was walking up and down the porch or the veranda with a woman who seemed to me rather poor. He was walking up and back and talking with her very intensely. And then she left his side, and a young man joined Gandhi. And they walked up and down the veranda, arguing and discussing. And I don't remember whom I asked. I asked, who were these young people, this man and woman? They were Harijans. They were married, and they were having marital difficulties. And Gandhiji was trying to improve their relations, to adjust their difficulties. This in the midst of what became the crucial period in India's history. This combination of Gandhi, of the statesman and the man who was interested in the life of ordinary people, this is very appealing.
He had the most infinite patience with the most humble of people that came to visit him and ask his advice. Rajkumari Amrit Kaur and some others in the ashram once tried to question the wisdom of this practice of always being available for advice and guidance to everyone.
We often used to chide him for giving so much time to persons who came to him for what we considered were petty grievances and personal problems, when we felt that he should be giving his time to more important things. But in return, he more than once rebuked me and said that those poor neglected persons were also God's creation, and if he was privileged to give them any solace whatsoever, it was his bounden duty even to give their demands priority. He then reminded me of how the halt, the blind, the maimed, and the sick came to Jesus for healing and solace, and he never refused them. Every day after his morning walk, Gandhiji went the round of the ashram to give a special message of cheer and comfort to those who were sick. His time was very precious, but he never grudged giving advice and guidance to those in need.
Dr. Zakir Hussain, the President of India.
You see, I think he took human beings very seriously. Every individual who came in touch with him was to him something worthwhile, something that had a right of its own, something that had a right to think, something that had a right to live. And I think that being ingrained in him, his behavior was motivated by that. He took everybody seriously, listened to everybody, gave the most patient hearing to even the most silly things. And much smaller persons and much less busy persons than Gandhiji would not suffer the type of fools that he suffered. But he suffered them, and he suffered them not because it was a pose. He suffered them because he thought the fool had a right.
He identified himself with the least of men.
I think that was the chief secret of his. He had embodied in himself humanity in all its aspects, the lowest and the highest.
Gandhiji gave himself freely and wholly to anybody who came to him, says Dr. Zakir Hussain. And he illustrates that statement with this story.
At a time when he was busy in one of the most important political drafting in connection with India's freedom, a young man from the ashram was heard to have said to him, Bapuji, in the midst of a group of very important national heroes sitting there. He came and he wanted a hearing, and Gandhiji attended to him, left his work, looked at him and said, what was the matter? And he said, I wanted to know whether I should eat cabbage or carrots today. And Gandhiji said, what have you been eating? What did you eat yesterday, and what was prescribed? What did I tell you, and so on. He talked to him for a minute and said, I think you eat cabbage. And the people who were sitting around were absolutely taken aback. How this young man could have dared come, and why this old man would listen to him. But that was the secret. That man was as important to him as Panditji or Vallabhbhai Patel or anybody, Maulana Abul Kalam sitting near him. He was applying his mind to their problem, he was applying his mind to the other man's problem, and when he applied his mind, he gave himself up entirely to it for that time.
His warm humanity and sincerity touched many people. Lord Casey, Governor of Bengal 1944 to 46, and his wife were one such couple.
Mahatma Gandhi's personality was real and live and endearing. He was regarded with very great affection and respect by all sections of the Indian community. Immense crowds assembled and followed him wherever and whenever he appeared. His personality, integrity, sincerity, and warm humanity had a tremendous effect on the hearts and minds of his countrymen, as well as on my wife and myself.
His utter humanity was possibly his strongest attribute. Sri Rajagopalachari saw this humanity in the man as an inseparable part of his philosophy.
There are two philosophies of life obstinately held, sometimes even by the same individual as by different strong-willed persons. One is what is expressed in the saying that the leopard cannot change its spots. The other is that every human being is basically good and reasonable, and if the approach is properly made, will be converted from evil and unreason to good and right conduct. Gandhiji swore by the latter philosophy. This is the core of all that he taught and practiced. He taught nothing which he did not practice. Gandhiji told us that where your point of view is not accepted in spite of every attempt at persuasion, and it is of vital importance that your view should prevail, then you should adopt the procedure of self-suffering or satyagraha in a form which may be appropriate to the case. The earnestness and sincerity of your conviction is proved by the loss or suffering which you undertake for its sake. This self-suffering overcomes the obstinacy or pride or selfishness of the other party. This method of action Gandhiji offered to the world as a substitute for the violence which had hitherto been considered the only alternative when persuasion and argument failed.
His humanity had another shining dimension. Its warmth and depth prevented him from retaliating even when his enemies criticized him. Lord Casey remembers.
Another admirable and unusual thing about him, in my experience, was his practice of never making any harsh or critical comment on other individuals, even of those who had said hard things about him. When I brought up their names, he would always find some good to say about them, and no ill.
But humanity by itself was not enough, either for India or the world. Truth and straight dealing, tolerance, fearlessness, and peaceful methods were basic to him. Jawaharlal Nehru says,
He taught us the dignity of man and of man's neighbor. He repeated the old lesson that out of hatred and violence, nothing but hatred and violence and destruction can result. And so he taught us the way of fearlessness, of unity, of tolerance, and of peace.
what was the sort of fearlessness Gandhiji practiced and expected of his countrymen and of people anywhere? Let's put the clock back to 1947 and those tragic days when Delhi was a city of the dead. Jamia Millia, a Muslim university, 10 miles from New Delhi, was surrounded by this communal slaughter as thousands huddled in its rooms and corridors, awaiting attack and almost certain death. And then Gandhiji arrived. Dr. Zakir Hussain, who was there, describes the effect of Gandhiji's arrival on the demoralized thousands who had collected at the university.
It was an experience that one can never forget, because you can imagine a colony of people away from the town, all day hearing of things happening in the town, killings and so on, surrounded by hostile villages, news being brought to them hour after hour that they would be invaded, and naturally all of them killed. Our supplies were cut, we couldn't go to the town, we couldn't buy things from the town, but we couldn't send them away. And then Gandhiji came. And we cannot tell you, it was much more than if a battalion were sent to us. But Gandhiji came and didn't bring any guns, and didn't try to get any guns for us, but his coming assured us that you were safe. And I'm sure he came for that reason. He wanted to show his identification with us, and to tell people that if they touch us, they have almost touched him. And what more could we have? He came and he went to all these refugees, and all of us at the time were refugees. We had all come into one place, so that we could be protected in case of danger. He first had a discussion with me, found out everything, how things were, how we were getting our food, how many people were there, and so on and so forth. And then he went round, and he went to all these refugees, and he spoke to these teachers and the students who were there. And he asked me if people had left the place. I said they were going to leave the place.
But no one left Jamia Millia, and as a result, no one was killed. They had followed Gandhiji's advice when he told them,
he said, life can be thrown away. And if you run away and are killed, you have thrown away your life. But if you stay here and are killed, you have not thrown it away. You stick to your place, do your work, and let the man who wants to kill you. If he is stronger, he would perhaps kill you, but then you would live. You would not have thrown away your life. You can live also in death. Life is not to be thrown away even in death.
Being fearless himself, he wanted others to be fearless. He was a man of action, but at the same time abhorred the use of force and the shedding of blood. Louis Fisher gives his estimate.
Yes. You recall that he was not very happy when the British quit India and when they granted independence to India, because it was not his kind of India that was emerging. So that for Gandhi, quit India was not the sole end. It was not the thing in itself that counted. And when the British quit India, but in circumstances that were connected with the shedding of blood and a ferocious wave of violence, and the partition of India, he mourned when others were jubilant. He was, of course, essentially a man of action. He was a devout person, a religious person, a thinker, an historian, and to me, one of the aspects of Gandhi that is most appealing was that while he was a nationalist, he differed from many nationalists of this day and his day in that he did not wish to harm the so-called metropolitan or mother country, that is Britain. He wanted to liberate India without doing any damage to the British. I think this is perhaps his greatest virtue, that while being a nationalist, he was also an internationalist.
Gandhiji was fearless, but his fearlessness was not limited to the fearlessness of the battlefield, for he did not believe in solving problems by waging war. It was a moral fearlessness. Jawaharlal Nehru puts it this way.
War today is not victory for anyone, is not even survival of anyone. It means uttermost defeat and uttermost disaster for all. And yet, such is this mad world that we live on this edge and brink of a precipice, and because of our fear and our apprehension, we dare not take the step which would rid us of this fear. Now, when I think of this state of affairs, I think of Gandhiji, that man who was more fearless than any man or woman that I have known. And I remember how, when I was a young man, and I saw that wonderful change that came over our people, and more especially among those who are poor and lowly, the peasantry and the worker and others who had been oppressed and suppressed and harried and kicked and cuffed. I remember long ago when his voice was heard by us and by them, a simple voice, a gentle voice, not a loud voice, but with some magic in it. And he merely told our people, do not be afraid. Do the right thing, and if you do the right, why need you be afraid? If you go to prison, there's nothing to fear. If you are shot down, what does it matter? You will die one day. Die bravely, doing the right, serving your country. But the wonderful thing was not in what he said, but the consequence and the effect of that on the multitudes of this country. Because suddenly their backs straightened, their eyes which had been dull and without any shine began to shine. There was hope in their faces, and gradually that oppression of fear went away.
And again,
the world is full of big men, wise men, clever statesmen. Let us hope that they will be able to solve it. But I must say that a solution of this problem will not yield to cleverness only, will not yield to maneuvering of one country or one clever statesman before another. It will not yield to some ingenious formula. It will only yield when people change their minds and hearts somewhat, even though the change may be little. When they get something of that spirit of fearlessness which Gandhi taught, and something of that adherence to principle too at the same time, because the two must go together.
to Mahatma Gandhi, means were even more important than ends. Mr. Nehru frequently stressed this point when analyzing the power and influence of Gandhiji.
Now, one very vital and important aspect of Gandhiji's message, repeated again and again, was that means are even more important than ends. That right ends, even right ends, do not justify bad means. That is to say, you may have a good objective, but in order to attain that good objective, you must not adopt bad ends. So he was always stressing this about means and ends. And I think perhaps it may be said that among the innumerable things he impressed us with, that was the basic thing, means and ends.
He believed in practicing what he preached, and his faith never swerved from his own ideal of non-violence, says Sarojini Naidu.
Why was it that this little man, this tiny man, this man with his child's body, this man so ascetic, living on the verge of starvation by choice, so as to be more in harmony with the lives of the poor, how was it that he exercised over the entire world of those who revered him and those who hated him such power as emperors could never wield? It was because he did not care for applause, he did not care for censure. He only cared for the path of righteousness. He cared only for the ideals which he preached and practiced. And in the midst of the most terrible disasters caused by violence and the greed of men, when the youth of the world was heaped up like dead leaves and dead flowers on battlefields, his faith never swerved in his own ideal of non-violence. He believed that though the whole world slaughter itself and the whole world's blood be shed, still his non-violence would be the authentic foundation of the new civilization of the world. And he believed that he who seeks his life shall lose it, and he who loses his life shall find it.
He refused to tolerate any outrage against human dignity, and his genius lay in his ability to turn an insult into an opportunity. He displayed his greatest genius, according to Dr. Stanley Jones, at a railway station in South Africa.
He was in South Africa in a first-class compartment with a first-class ticket. A white man got into the compartment and objected to riding with a man of color. The guard was called and Mr. Gandhi was ejected. He walked the station platform awaiting the arrival of a later train. As he paced up and down, he conceived of the idea of nonviolent non-cooperation. Briefly stated, it is this: I won't hate you, but I will not obey you. Do what you like, and I will match my capacity to suffer against your capacity to inflict the suffering, my soul force against your physical force, and I will wear you down with goodwill. That was a great moment in the history of humanity. A new vital force was to be applied on a large scale, the freedom of India. He came to India and applied it to the freedom of 400 million people, and won. And won in such a way that it was a great victory for both sides. Two great peoples parted as friends. When India got her freedom, it started a chain reaction. Burma got her freedom, then Ceylon, Indonesia, Indochina, Malaya, and Singapore. Now it is begun in Africa, where after Ghana got her freedom, then 22 nations have also gained theirs. An amazing accomplishment. Africa is the last battleground for human freedom. There the old imperialisms will put up their last stand and go down before the rising tide of the social revolution. Now note where all this tide started. It started in the soul of Gandhi when he paced that railway platform in South Africa. That was an expensive expulsion of Gandhi from that railway apartment, for it meant the expulsion of the whole of the sovereignty of the white man in India and the East, and now finally in Africa. If you sow expulsion, you reap expulsion. And now this movement has leaped across the oceans and is being applied in the southern states of the United States in regard to the freedom of the American Negro. When I went to see Dr. Luther King, the Negro leader for the integration of the Negro, in his office at Atlanta, he said to me, I got my first inkling of the meaning of nonviolent non-cooperation from the reading of your book, Mahatma Gandhi, An Interpretation. I said to myself, we must apply that method here in the Southland. And he did. I told him I would rather have him say that than anything I know. For this method of nonviolence is the method that must take the place of the bankrupt method of war. For it lifts both sides.
The late Dr. Martin Luther King, who was also felled by an assassin's bullet.
I am more convinced than ever before that the method of nonviolent resistance is the most potent weapon available to oppress people in their struggle for justice and human dignity. In a real sense, Mahatma Gandhi embodied in his life certain universal principles that are inherent in the moral structure of the universe. And these principles are as inescapable as the law of gravitation. And if this age is to survive, it must follow the way of love and nonviolence that he so nobly illustrated in his life. And Mahatma Gandhi may well be God's appeal to this generation, a generation drifting again to its doom. And this eternal appeal is in the form of a warning. They that live by the sword shall perish by the sword. We must come to see in the world today that what he taught and his method throughout revealed to us that that is an alternative to violence, and that if we fail to follow this, we will perish in our individual and in our collective lives. For in a day when Sputniks and explorers dash through outer space and guided ballistic missiles are carving highways of death through the stratosphere, no nation can win a war. Today we no longer have a choice between violence and nonviolence. It is either non-violence or non-existence.
Truth is God, and the way to him is non-violence. Muriel Lester records a statement by Gandhiji during his visit to London.
So Pierre said, what do you think, in your view, what does it take to make a leader? Quick as lightning, he said, a leader must seek nothing for himself, neither position, power or money. And he must remember God every minute of the 24 hours. God is truth. Truth is God, and the way to him is non-violence. The slopes of the Himalaya mountains are white with the bleached bones of those rishis and sages and saints who for centuries have lived there trying to wrest the secrets of God from him. And the outcome of all their strivings is this: truth is God, and the way to him is non-violence.
How near he was to God is dramatically illustrated in a walking incident which Muriel Lester witnessed.
And on this occasion, he suddenly stopped and pulled himself up and faced us all, and we all stopped and wondered what was happening. He said, "Look at me. I have no strength of my own at all." And we looked at his little, thin, fragile person, you know, and he said, "A boy could knock me over with a blow of his fist. All my strength comes from God, and I tell you, if the whole world were to deny him, I would be his sole witness." I love that bit.
Mahatma Gandhi believed in the wealth of no wealth. Louis Fisher.
In all the things that some people in the West sometimes regard as superficial, the dhoti and his diet, these were his means of communicating with all of India. He lived as India lived. He didn't live in a palace. He didn't live in a great villa. Although he wasn't a peasant, I don't think it was imitation. It was an attempt at identification.
A princess turned disciple adds,
Gandhiji possessed nothing, and yet was giving all the time. Of him it might truly be said that throughout life he gave unceasingly, and this was due to the fact that he was richly blessed by the God whom he sought from morning till evening, and without whose guidance he never took a single step.
He identified himself completely with the struggling masses of India.
Look at his own dress. He gave up everything because he felt that when he was in Orissa, I think it was, that people didn't have enough to clothe themselves. Therefore he reduced his own wants as far as clothes were concerned to the minimum. In Bihar, he asked Ba to go and tell some of the village women or ask them why their clothes were so dirty and give them soap to wash them with. And when Ba went into the cottage of this woman, the woman said to her, "Come and look and see whether I've got another sari to put on. What would you do?" And you see, that hurt him terribly. And therefore it was that he said, a person must reduce his wants to the minimum. Non-violence requires non-possession. He was a man who from morning till evening was giving all the time, whether he was writing a letter to comfort somebody, whether he was relating a story to a child, whether he was bandaging a bruised ankle, or whether he was massaging anybody, he was giving all the time. And therein lay his generosity. Of course, money had no charms for him. As you know, he gave up his lucrative practice in South Africa overnight.
Gandhiji mounted a massive assault on the barricades of untouchability.
Oh, of course. On untouchability, he was adamant. He always used to say that it was the curse of India and the curse of Hinduism, and that Hinduism could not live if untouchability lived. And therefore, for untouchability and the removal of untouchability, he was willing always to lay down his life. Nothing, he said, that Harijans said to us or did to us, if they abused us, if they hit us, if they killed us, he said we should stand all this without one word in order to expiate for even 1/1,000,000th part of the crimes that we had committed against them.
What were his views on fasting?
To him, fasting and prayer were part and parcel of the life of a true satyagrahi, meaning a seeker after God. He said that after all the great sages and saints had fasted, and one day he said to me, after all, he said, you've read the Bible, did not Christ fast before he undertook any great work? He did. He didn't fast to coerce anybody. He fasted in order to cleanse himself. And therefore his fasts were invariably turning the searchlight inwards to see where he had gone wrong, to seek guidance from above, following the right path.
Some of his critics thought that Gandhiji's fasts were a form of political coercion. Dr. Stanley Jones talked about this with Gandhiji in Yeroda jail.
I once went to see Mahatma Gandhi in the Yervada jail. He was then fasting in regard to the treatment of the outcasts. I said to him, isn't this fasting of yours a species of coercion? Yes, he said, it is. The same kind of coercion which Jesus exercises upon you from the cross. I could say nothing in reply, for it was strangely akin.
How far has Gandhiji's message traveled outside India? Hubert H. Humphrey, Vice President of the United States of America.
Gandhi's humble, direct simplicity touched our hearts as it touched the hearts of all those throughout the globe who would in some small way or measure seek to be their brother's keeper. His signal contribution was in reminding the 20th century of what other great souls in the centuries past had told a weary and too often strife-ridden world, that the brother for whom we bear responsibility is every man on whom we look in whatever community, race, or nation we may find him. He truly exemplified the living spirit of brotherhood. I can think of no better time in human history that these teachings should be made available to all of mankind, because we are in a period of revolution for human emancipation, and yet we are hopeful that this revolution may be peaceful. And Mahatma Gandhi, a man of peace and yet a man of change, a man of revolution and yet a man of nonviolence. These are standards to which we can ask all men to rally as they seek to make a better world.
The disciple sums up.
He was remarkable. He was magnetic. He demanded loyalty from you, and he got it because of his greatness. And because he radiated love, you couldn't help being drawn to him. And then he was dynamic. He was never static. If he said a thing today, he was great enough tomorrow to feel that if circumstances had changed, he might also have to modify what he had said. And there he was, a man of courage, a man of amazing faith, and a man of amazing foresight, a man who could lay his finger straight away on the pulse of the nation, on the pulse of the disease, and recommend you the remedies and what should be done. A guide such as we shall never have again.
Patrick Lawrence.
Gandhi, of course, was a man of wonderful, he was a wonderfully great man. He had a tremendous influence, lasting influence in this country and indeed all over the world. And his name and his work, their generosity of spirit and moral tone will not soon, or if ever, be forgotten.
Gandhiji did not believe in narrow nationalism. He wanted the windows of his nation to be flung open to new ideas from the rest of the world.
Mr. Gandhi once said, I want my people and my nation to keep all the doors and windows of its mind and spirit open to the winds from all countries. But I do not want our people to be blown away by those winds, which I think is a fairly good way of putting it, that we must accept, be open to everything, learn from everything, but keep our feet on the ground of our own soil.
The power of the atom, versus the power of Atma, the power of the spirit. Dr. Stanley Jones points to the choices before the world today.
When the atom and its power was discovered, there was also discovered the power of the Atma, the power of spirit. The question is, which type of power is going to rule the future, the atom or the Atma? I believe if the atom rules, we're ruined. If the Atma rules, then we're redeemed. I believe God raised up Mahatma Gandhi to show the sheer power of spirit, the power of the Atma. It is the question whether the Atma will rule the atom and direct its power to the uplift of humanity, or whether the atom rules the Atma and directs its power to the ruin of humanity, literally.
Did Gandhiji have a premonition of his death? Rajkumari Amrit Kaur saw him just before he was assassinated. She tells us,
If God means that I should go that way, well, no one is going to be able to protect me. I have escaped death so often that way. That is all that he said to me. And then he said, if, however, I am to go in that manner, then all I want is this, that there shall be no bitterness in my heart against the man who wants to kill me, and that I shall go into my Creator's lap with the name of God on my lips. And that is exactly what happened.
When he died, two words came together, says Dr. Stanley Jones.
When Mahatma Gandhi was shot by Godse, two words came together, some and all. Godse represented some. He wanted in India for some. Gandhi wanted in India for all, Hindus, Mohammedans, Parsis, Christians, whatnot. The some shot the all. But while Mahatma Gandhi's body fell, his spirit goes marching on. Throughout the world there is a struggle between some and all. The some wanting exclusive privileges and places and power, and the all wanting these privileges and places and power for everybody. So Mahatma Gandhi died upon the altar of all. It was a befitting issue upon which to die. It summed up his life. He lived for an India for all, and he died on the altar of an India for all. He could not have chosen a better issue upon which to die. When the role of the peacemakers is called, Mahatma Gandhi's name will stand high on that roll.
The greatness of Gandhi is not so much what he has done for others, but what others have done because of him, and the power of his example. This is the measure of the man. What came out of his life and thought inspired a generation. The power of his appeal lay in renunciation. His aim was not to dazzle an age, but to awaken it, to make it comprehend that moral splendor is part of the gift of life, and that each man has unlimited strength to feel human oneness and to act upon it. And so, never have so many owed so much to one man.